Alright everyone, I'm rusyxx. We're here with some Godzilla Save the Earth. So there's a bit of loading screens and a cutscene, so I'm not going to wait too long to jump into here. The timer starts a little bit afterwards. So this is one of those early 2000 Godzilla games. There were quite a few actually. This is actually not the one most people think of. Most people think of Destroy All Monsters, but this is Save the Earth. There's a couple of different problems with it, but time will start in 3, 2, 1, go. So yeah, so this game is basically rushed out of production in 2004 because of the movie Final Wars. For those who know, Final Wars was like the big celebration of all things Godzilla. It's a bit silly, but they were really trying to revitalize Godzilla at the time, and it just wasn't paying off. So this was their big finale. So as a result, a lot of things actually got cut out of this game. There's a lot of elements where there was supposed to be a story. There was supposed to be more to the stages. You can see the little containers on the bottom. It's like those were supposed to be part of a story, like Godzilla's G cells, which play a part in a lot of movies in the 90s. You collect the 5, but it doesn't really mean anything in the game outside of a higher score. So it's like that's basically the game in a nutshell. So for this first fight, there's not a whole lot to talk about. We're just picking up Baragon, throwing her and trying to wrap it up from there. Hopefully they don't dig too often. The first 2 stages are both kaiju that like to dig into the ground, and we try to avoid that if we can. Fortunately, Baragon doesn't do it too much usually, and we got a good little clean fight there. So next up will be Megalon. So Megalon was a bit trickier because they dig into the ground far more often usually. Because one of the trickier parts about this game actually is the AI tends to be a little random with what it wants to do. Sometimes I have runs where Megalon doesn't want to dig into the ground at all, and then I have runs where they do it every 5 seconds. So, of course, we always hope for the times they don't dig, but for marathon runs, I'm going to go for the safety of assuming they're going to dig. Like you saw it right there, he was jumping into the ground. It's not the ideal release of the atomic breath. You'll notice I'm throwing them and going for the atomic breath. In most cases, we're going to try and get a full charge because that's the maximum damage. It's like, obviously, more damage means faster defeats. But with Megalon, more often than not, if you go for a full atomic breath, they will get up and dig before you can actually release. So we have to go for the minimum damage. Of course, if I'm going for PB attempts, I'm just going to go for it and be sad if I miss. But for a marathon round, I'm just going to try my best not to let him dig too much. So far, he's been kind of nice. Normally, he's a lot ruder. It's like, and sometimes I'm not gonna probably get the show, but sometimes you can get a close call where they're in the ground. Godzilla manages to shoot them from inside out of the ground back up into the air. That's what was kind of neat to see, but it doesn't look like I'm going. Oh, maybe, nope. I was a little too late there. But other than that, it's like these are the 2 stages at the beginning are kind of tricky because of that, and a very reset heavy portion. This was actually a relatively decent Megalon, not the best, but like. Anything below minute 30, Megalon is kind of acceptable. So next will be King Ghidorah. So anybody who watches Godzilla films typically knows King Ghidorah is kind of like Godzilla's arch rival, arch nemesis, everything about that. In the speedrun, not so much. He kind of goes down quietly. And there's a couple reasons for that. Granted, right now he's kind of proving me wrong. He decided he was going to do a drop kick. But one of the big problems that comes as the AI improve as you go through the 10 stages is the stages tend to have a lot of buildings, and the buildings get in the way of atomic breaths of the throws and allow things to get a little complicated. Fortunately for us, with King Ghidorah, that's not a problem. Because King Ghidorah starts off in an airfield area, so we can just start tossing around. There's no buildings to obstruct us. They can try and roll, but more often than not, we'll still hit them. Because that's one of those things you're going to notice how the AI do a lot with the later characters, is they're going to roll on the ground and try to get close. Because the best thing they can do to counter me going for atomic breath is to roll, and they immediately do their ground attack before standing up to continue. Fortunately with King Ghidorah, he usually doesn't do that. More often, he just kind of jumps, and then every once in a while he'll release a special, which doesn't do anything immediate. So it's not really a problem in the speedrun for us. He decided to survive with just a sliver of health here, so it's going to take one more hit. So following this up, there's going to be the first of two mini games that are in this speedrun, and every arena run you do in this game. So one of the interesting things about this game is like it doesn't really care if you beat the mini games. It cares if you beat the fights. Like you have to beat all the fights, but the mini games they don't really care so much. So with this next mini game, we're supposed to defend a building from a UFO. We're going to opt out of that. We're going to pick up this building right here, and we're going to destroy it. Godzilla doesn't have time to protect the humans' buildings. There's no time for that. So we're just going to destroy that. That was actually really good. More often now, there will be a little sliver of health on the building, then we have to tail whip it, but we got it in one shot. That was really good. So now we're on to back to the fighting. So now we have Mogera. Mogera can be really trolly in the run. Despite how it looks, this is actually what we want. We want Mogera to spam as much as possible, because you might notice his special bar going down. Mogera doesn't recharge like the other kaiju. Like Godzilla, you see is slowly going back up the longer I'm not using Atomic Breath. Well, Mogera, his doesn't go back up. He has to actually sit and charge it. So the ideal setup is he spams a bunch of it at the beginning, and he's unable to really do much of anything except do melee attacks. And more often than not, those aren't effective. So far in this run, he hasn't done that. But as you see, like he spams pretty quickly when he does. And that's what we wanted him to do, typically at the beginning of the run. Because eventually he'll try to run away, and he gives us a perfect moment to do an Atomic Breath, and it deals a massive amount of damage because it's completely undefended. We might get a chance to see that. He's probably going to try to run away in a second because he has literally nothing. He's stuck here, so there we go. That's not exactly what I was expecting. That was like a nice little PS2 glitch that usually doesn't happen. Normally he just kind of shuts down, but we didn't even need that time. He just kind of got stuck on the game. That's actually the first time I've seen them do that. It's one of those never happened before, but it's actually kind of beneficial moments. Yeah, Mogera can be really trolly. It depends on what his AI is feeling that day. It was a little slower than I would like. Normally I want him to just like use up all of his special right from the get-go. And I can just sit there Atomic Breathing him with almost no defenses for at least 2 or 3 attacks. Follow this up is Angerus. Any Godzilla buffs in the chat might actually know him as the first kaiju that Godzilla ever fought in the films. He was the first kaiju versus kaiju fight. In the games, he has the strongest defense in the entire game because he has that nice little spike back. So to counteract that, there's a couple things we can do. The big thing is like when he stands up, we try to hit him in his stomach. If we don't time it just right, it doesn't do nearly as much damage. It'll deal like a third of the damage we want. And preferably, we'll try to avoid getting him through too many buildings, or if we do, we try to destroy as many of them as quickly as possible so that they can't get in the way again. Because this is one of those stages, like all the buildings are very tightly packed, and with Angerus being low to the ground, it's very hard to avoid doing Atomic Breaths to the buildings or throwing him into buildings. Because one thing I haven't touched on yet is like, I really don't like to throw. You don't want to throw any of the kaiju into anything, whether it be the barricade or the buildings, except for one separate case which we'll get to later, because they get up quicker that way. And we don't want them to get up quick because we want to have time to charge up our special and hit them with that nice Atomic Breath. This one, it looks like it's actually a really clean Angerus fight. Guy, he's decided to survive with the least amount of health possible. But overall, not the worst. Because even when the ideal fight, he still usually take a minute and 10 seconds, I think, at the fastest, if you hit everything ideally. Because he has so much defense, even when you hit him just right. I believe Rodan is next. Let's see. Yep. So Rodan's an interesting one. Rodan can be either one of the quickest fights in the game, or one of the most awkward ones. As you can see, like he has got so many tall buildings, it's hard to get him, and he can fly, as you might have guessed by his wings. What he doesn't usually use those wings to actually do damage or fight you properly. Normally, he might spam you a bit at the beginning of the fight, But more often than not, when he flies, he just takes off to the opposite side of the stage. And that's such a pain in the run for obvious reasons. Like, it's very hard. You can't just blast through the buildings because the buildings will block your atomic breath. You have to kind of try and navigate it. So ideally, we want him to try and stand and fight you as much as possible, but the AI does what the AI does. It's like, even now, like, he's doing more damage to me than I would prefer, but it's still better than the alternative of him flying to the other side of the stage. He's kind of weak, in all honesty. So you probably noticed he's done like a slip. He's hit me with all his attacks, barely did any real damage. Whereas most of my attacks are doing a decent amount. He was blocking there. I still did about as much damage as he did to all the attacks he did to me on block. So Rodan overall is kind of weak against Godzilla, and that was a relatively quick Rodan. Not the quickest. Rodan can actually go down in like 30 seconds. I've had it happen one time where he just had the perfect lineup. He just did not run away. But normally about a minute 20 seconds is what you'll expect from Rodan. So now we're on the final of the 2-minute games. This one is there actually a reason for the estimate being 20 minutes. So it's a 3-minute time limit. We affectionately call it Kaiju Bowling. Or Monster Bowling, I think is how the game actually refers to it. So basically we're trying to throw these rocks at these 3 kaiju. So you may have noticed Godzilla doesn't like to pick up rocks very well. I actually messed up. There's actually a bit attack to it. I messed it up. Typically, we try and catch one of the first rocks they throw at us, and we immediately throw it back at them, and that will usually set us up for success. All right, now if we can get Ingress really quick, we might be able to get a decent Kaiju Bowling. But Godzilla is deciding not to pick up the rocks. All right, we got it. Nice. Anything sub-minute is a really winner. It's like, I've lost so many PBs to Kaiju Bowling because it can just go so wrong. Sometimes Godzilla just doesn't want to pick up the boulders. Sometimes, like, that final throw at Ingress, sometimes Ingress will decide that's the moment to move around to go grab a rock. So there's so much you just can't predict. Alright, so Mothra is the biggest exception in this run to everything. You might notice, like, the run's been relatively repetitive and all that. The beginning of the Mothra like, kind of is, too. The trick with Mothra, though, is you might know... People who know Mothra probably know her more for her moth form. But you see her in her larva form. Well, why is that? Well, the developers wanted to include a way for to demonstrate Mothra's transformation. So that's what it does. It allows Mothra to transform from larva to moth. And the most annoying part of this first phase is really just the silk being shot out by the larvae. But after a certain damage threshold, Mothra's larvae form will turn into Mothra. It'll probably happen right about now. There we go. And then they get all of their health back. But not just that, it's like if I were to try and do an atomic breath right now, Mothra blocks it. Mothra is basically at least with the AI, because there is actually an input required, but the AI never misses it. No matter what difficulty you're on, Mothra will always block every kaiju special with her defenses. I've never seen her miss, which makes her the only kaiju that I have to fight kind of as intended. And my way to deal with that is I try to keep her in larvae form as close to the screen barrier as possible, because it allows me to just repeatedly throw her up and smash her back down, tail whip her in the ground. Sometimes she'll get up and smash herself into it, which keeps her from hitting me. It's just the quickest way to deal with it normally. Now, in the Xbox version of the game, there's actually a quicker way to deal with it that skips the second phase of this fight entirely, because they found a motion cancel where they're able to sit and tail whip repeatedly. It actually makes the entire run much faster than this. But for whatever reason, on the PS2 version, either it does not exist or I have not been able to get it to work. One of the two. The runner who discovered it on Xbox hasn't run the game for like 5 years, so I can't ask him either. But basically, you just sit there and tail whip it, and it does damage so quickly that Mothra doesn't react in time to turn into Moth. And it cuts off like an entire minute and a half of the run. That's why if you look at the speedrun boards, there's such a big disparity between the Xbox and PS2 times. So that's Mothra. So now we're on coming up on the final stage, which is Mechagodzilla 2. And if you have any words or anything you want to put out, this is a good time. The final fight's nothing special.
Godzilla, the monsters, fight!
Alright then. Alright, so for Mechagodzilla, it's pretty standard. Mechagodzilla's AI is a bit trickier than all the other ones. It is the final stage after all. So it's like, it reacts a bit smartly. Sometimes if we're really unlucky, like that throw could have easily ended up with Mechagodzilla throwing us out into the wild that's outside the center stage where we don't want to be. Fortunately they didn't. They also like to roll like that, where they'll also roll out into the unknown and wild. We generally prefer they don't do that, but you can't really control it sometimes. But at the same time, like, ideally, Mechagodzilla is actually the ideal final boss in this game, because normally it's Orga, and Orga just throws you no matter who you are. Like, you get a little close to Orga, he throws you. So Mechagodzilla, in the grand scheme of things, is pretty simple. He just likes to roll a lot generally, which makes doing the atomic breath a little tricky sometimes. Granted, he's being a little annoying now, he's jumping around. Him, Mothra, and Kaiju Bowling have killed so many PBs for being a little different. Like right now, he's deciding to spam attacks. And he does it a little different every time. Like, figuring out exactly what he's going to do every single time is next to impossible, it feels like. Just kind of prepared a little bit each time. Alright, so time will be coming up, not on the final blow, but when the KO screen comes up. Should be one more atomic breath, it looks like. And time. Alright, so that was Godzilla Saves the Earth. With that said, though, there was an incentive up. Want to go ahead and check in on that, see if we made it?
Yeah, I'm going to check that right away. Of the donation incentive is being matched by the figure that is being planned, like 100 euros. And we are currently on 57, so yeah, the donation is not be held, so I'm sorry to give that in, but good job on the GG.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but hopefully people get to see it next time. Hope everyone enjoyed the run. It's like that. I've been rusyxx. I don't have a whole lot to put out. There's not much for the community, so hope everybody enjoys the rest of the marathon.
All right, thank you very much for that awesome run. Very much appreciated. Let's get on to the next one. The next one will be the Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 on HT, the Goku story 80% by Rebel Dragon on the Xbox 360. We'll be right back.